Today's session will be available on the AssetOptics YouTube channel, and we will send a copy of the PowerPoint out to all of the attendees. We have some very specific learning objectives outlined for today. The first is to learn how planned and actual labor costs are derived on a work order. Secondly, or to learn how planned and actual part costs are derived on a work order. The third element are for miscellaneous costs. And lastly, to learn how total annualized PM costs are calculated on a work order. And then we'll look at some methods to report on your total maintenance costs. There are three major cost elements on a work order. First is labor, second is parts, third is miscellaneous costs. The labor, there are two elements for every one of the costs, both the planned amounts as well as the actual amounts. The first thing that we're going to take a look at are labor costs. Every work order allows you to have multiple work order tasks associated with it. The planned labor cost on a work order is derived from taking the total planned hours on a task and multiplying that by the craft rate. So the rate that is associated from that particular craft. If there's not a craft, then the rate comes from a default value. So we have planned labor costs on every work order task, and then all of the planned labor costs roll up. The actual labor costs come from the time entry that you enter on a work order task. There are three specific time entry buckets: regular, overtime, and double time. The actual labor rate comes from the user's detail record. Now, it's important to know that the three time buckets of regular, overtime, and double time that show up when you enter your time, that this is not necessarily just a mathematical calculation of a 1, 1.5, and 2 rate, but what this really is a regular hours premium 1, premium 2, if you will. Because when you are on the end user's record, you can specify the rates in any level of any rate structure. Although I show it here as 10, 15, 20, it could be 10, 20, 30 for that matter. So again, it's really regular hours, premium time 1, premium time 2, and then the actual labor hours are calculated. So let's go take a look at a few examples here, if you will. So first, we're going to we're going to go create a new work order. Okay, and this work order, we're going to give it a title here. We're just going to call it labor cost analysis. And I'm going to change the status of this to all the way up to scheduled so that I can book some time on it afterwards. And I'm going to save that. Now, the first thing that you'll notice here is that we had a task that got generated, one work order task that has 1.5 planned hours on it. That 1.5 planned hours came from the fact that on the work order header, when it was created, we had this value called initial estimated hours. There's a configurable default setting, and it is this amount that will be generated on the very first task. Every work order will have at least one work order task, as the work order task is necessary for you to book actual labor hours against. If we see here the overall work order costs, I'm going to expand this section. We see that we have planned labor costs of $52.50. Well, that comes from this one work order task right here. And we notice that there is no craft that's tied to this one. If I'm going to put this in edit mode, we see that we did not have a craft here, and then we have 1.5 planned hours. I'm going to make the math a little easy and just change that to 1 planned hour. So we can see that at 1 planned hour with no craft, we have $35 in planned labor. There's no craft. Since there's no craft, I said earlier, this came from a default setting. So if you go into Setup and you go under Develop to access the custom settings, there's a set of parameters on work order install parameters, and I'm going to go to Manage right here. And we can see that we have the default setting at the org level for $35. So these work order parameters are hierarchical parameters. We have a value set at the org level, but of course, since they're hierarchical, you could set a default for a specific user or for a profile, meaning that if one user generates the work order, they get a certain default rate, whereas a different user could generate a work order and get a different default rate. So if you had in a multi-site environment, even when you weren't using different crafts, you could still have different default rates because you could default them by the appropriate planner or profile that was creating those. So we're going to cancel that, and we're going to go back to this work order right here that we were looking at, and we're going to go add another, we're going to go add a craft to it. Okay, so we've got the work order task and we don't have any crafts here. If we take a quick look over here at all of our crafts, just going to access other tabs and take a look at crafts, we can see that we have 5 different crafts that are put in the system, all with different planned labor rates. I'm going to go back to that work order right here, and I'm going to edit that, and I'm going to add a different craft. We've currently got $35 at an hour. I'm going to put an E&I technician on here. And of course, the planned labor costs now have increased to $60 for that particular planned labor costs. Now, of course, if you have multiple work order tasks, then the planned labor cost for that work order is the rolled up summary of all of the work order tasks. So we see we've now added a second work order task for an electrician. For 1 planned hour, it's $55.55 for that electrician. If we go to the work order, now we see that our planned labor costs has increased from that $60 to include the additional amount. And of course, you can see it at the individual work order task level. Time entry and recording actual costs. So when we go to a work order task and we record actual labor hours, and I'm going to enter time here, just select my user, and I'm going to say I'm going to log a half an hour of regular time here, and then we go back to the work order, all the way back up to the header of the work order, we can start seeing some actual work order costs, actual labor costs that begin to accumulate. So just to kind of, so again, the planned labor costs are coming from planned hours. The actual labor costs come from your time entry. So let's talk about planned part costs and actual part costs. Planned part costs come from the work order part records. And there are 2 things that you enter to plan a part onto a work order. You enter the part and you enter a planned quantity. There's also an attribute that is included here called commit inventory. This attribute is what determines if that particular part for that work order is driving any commitment processing in the inventory management system. The actual part costs on the work order come from the actual inventory issues, not the planned amounts, but the actual inventory issues. And it's important to note that you can issue parts to a work order without pre-planning them. If you don't plan the parts, they won't be included in the planned part costs, but they will be included in the actual part costs. So if we're going to drill over here into the software and take a look at that, we're going to stay on the same work order right here. And the first thing we're going to do with this particular work order, we're just going to go to a part record and we're going to issue it to work order 52303. So I'm going to go to a part. We'll see that we have 4 on hand for this item and the unit value is $20.50. So I'm going to go to a new part transaction. We're going to select the default of the inventory issue. I'm going to select 1 and I'm going to choose the work order right here. And I'm going to save that work order, and then we'll go back to this work order, save the part transaction, we'll go back to this work order. Now we can see that the actual part cost is $20.50. But if you'll notice over here, the planned part cost is still sitting at 0. If you do not plan a part on the work order and you just issue it, a work order part record is in fact created, but the planned quantity shows up as 0. So we have a 0 planned quantity, but we have an issued quantity of 1. And of course, we can see this issued transaction showing up right here on the work order related list. Now, even though, so that would behave a little bit differently if we planned the part to the work order first. So you could add a planned part onto a work order, and it would roll up in the planned cost. However, we're just going to go back to that part, that work order part record, and we're going to change this planned quantity from a 0. And we're going to change this now up to a 2. Okay, so initially we just issued it and there was the planned quantity was 0. We're going to update that to a planned quantity of 2. So we now see that the planned part cost is $41 and our actual is $20.50 because of course we've only issued 1. And we'll note here that we still have 1 in open commit, and that's driving a demand on inventory. And we're going to talk about the whole demand-driven inventory management in our next upcoming session in 2 weeks. So if we took the same part and we issued it to the same work order once again, we're going to take this same here. We're going to issue 1. We're going to choose this work order. Actually, instead of 1, we're going to issue 2. We're going to issue more than what we had planned. So let's grab that work order right there. And we're going to go back to the work order and take a look. So, of course, our total planned quantity is still sitting at $41 because our planned amount was for 2 units. Our actual part cost is now at $61.50 because our actual issued quantity is 3 right here. We planned 2, we issued 3. There are none that are being driven by commitments. And if we see here, we have 2 individual issue transactions that are rolling up the total actual part cost right here. And of course, if we had multiple part lines on this work order, that would all roll up into multiple line items for both planned as well as actual parts. So the third element of work order costing, are miscellaneous costs. So if we go take a look here, so let's pull this up and take a look at miscellaneous costs. And so what is a miscellaneous cost? A work order miscellaneous cost is used to capture all costs that are not entered through either time entry or inventory issues. The work order miscellaneous costs can also be directly populated from purchase receipts on the purchase order miscellaneous cost lines. Now, a purchase order miscellaneous cost can have a description. You can have a cost type as a pick list value, giving you the ability to categorize it. You can specify the vendor whom that cost was derived from. You can have a planned cost and an actual miscellaneous cost amount. So let's go take a look here, and we're going to go back and take a look at work order miscellaneous costs, and we're going to enter one here. So I'm going to say new work order miscellaneous cost. I'm just going to select a cost type here. This is a configurable pick list. And we're going to say, contract labor for welding. And that could come from a specific vendor that we have. And we could choose that. We could choose that vendor if we had a service provider set up. I'm going to skip it for right now. And I'm going to say that the planned amount is, $300 for this contract labor. So if we go take a look at this work order now, we can see that we have $115 in planned labor. This comes from the work order task, 41 in planned parts, 300 in planned miscellaneous charges for a total planned work order cost of $456. Then on the actual side, we've booked $20 worth of labor. We've issued $61.50 in parts, and we've not documented any work order miscellaneous costs on the actual side. Now, the work order miscellaneous costs, again, there's a couple of different ways that this can be configured, where you can directly enter the values. You can log a miscellaneous cost transaction, which is basically a receipt. And let's say I'm going to receive in 150 of this. And when we go back and we look at this miscellaneous cost right here, we plan for 300. We have 150 in actual. This miscellaneous cost line could have in fact been fed from a purchase order if we issued a PO for this miscellaneous line. When it gets received on that purchase order, it then would document it to this particular work order. So if we go back here to the work order, now we can see how more of the costs begin to roll up here. So again, $20 in actual labor, $61.50, and now we see that we have $150 in actual work order miscellaneous costs. So again, those are the three basic elements of work order costs. We've got labor, parts, and miscellaneous charges. To kind of recap then on the labor component, the planned labor cost comes from the planned hours multiplied by the craft rate. And if you do not have a craft, then a default setting is used. So we're going to just put in 1 hour right here and go back to the work order. So we'll see here where we have a craft on these two line items, we don't have a craft here, and we get the default rate. For the parts, the planned part cost comes from the planned quantity and the unit cost for that particular part. And if you update the planned quantity at any point in time, the unit cost is updated at that specific point, okay? So in other words, if you plan a work order and then route it through an approval process and you subsequently receive in more of that same stock item inventory, and let's say the weighted average inventory changes, that does not adjust the planned costs on the work order. But when you issue it, you can in fact then get the actual cost at the point in time when that part is issued. So miscellaneous costs, the work order miscellaneous costs, these costs are again for all non-inventory, non-part issue costs that we want to roll up to the work order. So the third element, So let's move on to our next learning objective here. Planned preventive maintenance costs. So the planned preventive maintenance costs is a new feature that is going to be is being released in version 2.10, scheduled for next month, March 2016. And each of the different types of preventive maintenance scheduling methods calculate planned PM costs in a different manner. So there are three different methods that we're going to talk about here, which are the ones that are offered in case you did not attend the last session on preventive maintenance scheduling. They're calendar-based PMs, they're meter-based PMs, and then there are PM group schedules, which are hierarchical PMs. So for the basic calendar-based PM schedules, what you see is a planned occurrences per year that gets calculated based upon the interval and the unit of measure, and we're going to drill over to that. Each of the planned costs, each of the PM work order events has a planned cost per occurrence. That comes from the model work order. So then the total planned PM costs are derived by taking the cost per occurrence and extending that by the total number of occurrences per year. Now, one of the features that we offer is that you can override the number of planned occurrences per year if your unique business requirements, would state. So let's go take a look at this in the software here. So we're going to go to PM schedule, and we're going to go look for a calendar-based floating PM schedule, and we'll grab this one right here. So this preventive maintenance schedule that is calendar-based, this one is being done every 104 weeks. So basically every 2 years. It's being driven from this model work order, so this work order template. So when we look at the total number of planned occurrences per year, of course, that comes up to a half occurrence per year because it's done once every 2 years. Now, like I said, on every calendar-based PM and every meter-based PM, there's another method to do this, you can override the number of planned occurrences for your own kind of purposes here. So I'm overriding this to 1. Then the planned occurrences per year come up to be 1. Okay, I'm just going to go back to that being null, and it's going to take that back to a half. Well, one of the ways, why would you want to do this? So theoretically, let's say that we have a job and we're taking all of our PMs and we want to roll up our annualized amount. If we didn't want a job that was being done every 2 years because this might be done during a shutdown or turnaround, we might not want this to roll up into our baseline labor planning for the year. So we could just go in here and we can make that a 0, and then you can essentially factor that out, and then it won't roll up into your overall planned labor your planned labor hours per year for that specific PM. Okay, so I'm going to change that back to a null, and it will roll up here. So of course the system is calculating a half an occurrence per year. The planned labor hours per occurrence is 1.5, and that comes from the template work order that says I'm doing this a half a time. It takes 1.5 hours to do it. I'm doing it a half time per year. So basically, I roll up to, 0.75 hours. If we go over here and we look at the costs, we see that the planned costs per year are $5, and that basically means that it costs $10 on that work order. There are no miscellaneous charges. And the planned labor cost per year $26.25, which of course, if we go over and take a look at the work order, we'll see that the total amount, of course, is going to be $52.50. So the total planned amount to do this particular PM cost me $31.25 per year. Okay, so this is how it works for a calendar basis. Now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to make some changes here in just for purposes of discussion, and we're going to take this one. I'm just going to change this, and let's say that this is really a daily checklist. Okay, so when you build daily checklists, you end up using a calendar interval of 1. So if we look now, we see that this is done 365 times per year. Well, the planned number of occurrences when you're doing dailies and weeklies, when it falls below 7, basically when it falls below 7 days a week. So at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, then the Saturday inclusion or the Saturday and Sunday exclusions get calculated here. So let's say that we want to exclude the Saturdays and Sundays on the dailies. Well, then we calculate that this is only done 261 times per year. So we get our overall planned labor occurrence at that point. If we just excluded the Sunday, we'd see that that bumps up to 313 times per year. So now let's go take a look at a meter-based PM schedule and how that works on the meter-based PM schedules. So on a meter-based PM, excuse me, just kind of jumped ahead there. On a meter-based PM, there is an estimated annual usage that is applied on the meter. Then the planned occurrences per year is calculated by taking the estimated annual usage and dividing that by the meter schedule interval. Okay, so if we go take a look at a meter-based PM, we would see something a little bit different. And we're going to go here, and collapse that section, and expand this section right here. So if we see on this PM schedule, this is to be done every 1,000 hours, and we can see that the number of planned occurrences per year is 3.5. Well, how's that? How do we derive that? If we take a look at the estimated annual meter usage, it's 3,500 hours per year. So if we edited, those planned out, the estimated planned usage, and took that down to 2,000, and we took a look at this PM, it would then calculate it's to be done twice per year. And of course, just like with the calendar-based overrides, you can do the meter-based overrides. So if I just wanted to manually override that and make it 3 and not worry about any of the estimations, I can just put in a 3. Okay? And if I null that back out, then it goes back to the actual calculated value. Everything else works the same as the calendar base, except we're just using the meters to calculate the number of planned occurrences per year. So one more, we're going to go take a look at PM group schedules. And let me flip this up here. And we're going to take a look at PM group schedules. For those of you who are not familiar with PM group schedules, PM group scheduling is a feature that was released in version 2.9. Version 2.9 is the latest release and the latest and current release. What PM group schedules enables you to do is to create essentially a hierarchical set of preventive maintenance jobs. It works on monthly buckets. So if we look here, we can see that for this particular asset, we are doing this job, and it's going to be due on the third Sunday of the month, the third Sunday of the month. So there's some configurations. Again, if you're not familiar with this, I would encourage you to go watch the recorded session on the AssetOptics YouTube channel that we did 2 weeks ago, and it will explain this in more detail. But when we look here, we see that we've got a job set up to be done on monthly basis, quarterly basis, semi-annual basis, annual, and every 24 months. Well, the planned occurrences per year for these particular jobs takes into account that the parent suppresses it. So if we look here, we can see that the monthly is done 8 times a year, while the quarterly is done twice a year. The semi-annual is done once per year. The annual is done half a time per year, and the semi-annual a half a time per year. Because if you think about the cycle, it goes monthly, monthly, quarterly, monthly, monthly, semi-annual, monthly, monthly, quarterly, monthly, monthly, annual. Now, if there were a 48-month job that is to be done, then this 24-month job would calculate out to be done 0.25 times per year. And just like you can suppress and override the calculated planned occurrences on a standalone PM schedule, you can also do that on a PM group schedule, because again, you might not want a 24-month or a 48-month cycle job to count into your baseline loading. As well as, of course, you can write your appropriate reports, and you could filter that out. Okay, so if we go take a look at that, in the software, and we take a look at PM group schedules. Let's grab this one as an example. We can see here that, again, if we wanted to override, that, and actually let me go back and let's say that we're going to override this one, because this is a 24-month job and we don't want it to go into our calculations. I'm going to make an override of 0 and put that on here. So when we look at the planned occurrences per year, this now shows the overridden value of 0. So when we look here at the planned labor hours per year, this drops down to 0. So to just kind of recap here, there are 3 different types of PM scheduling processes. You can have calendar-based and meter-based PM schedules. Calendar-based and meter-based PM schedules. So the calendar-based PM schedule takes into account skips for Saturdays and Sundays when it calculates the occurrences per year. Now, and the regular PM schedule does not have a parent-child relationship on that PM schedule. So prior to version 2.9 being released, if you had a monthly PM and you had a quarterly PM, you had to reschedule the monthly when it came out, or you had to cancel it, one of the two. Most everybody would essentially just reschedule it manually for the upcoming month, and you had to kind of monitor that yourself. Now with version 2.9 and the notion of the PM groups, the quarterlies will suppress the monthlies, the annuals will suppress the quarterlies. So with the PM groups, the frequency, the number of occurrences per year takes into account that the individual PM is being suppressed in that hierarchy. Then back up to the meter-based schedule. On the meter-based schedule, the total occurrences per year is derived from the estimated usage on the meter and the meter schedule interval on that particular PM. And of course, all the different methods allow you to override the specific occurrences per year. Total maintenance costs. So now with all of that kind of put into mind, how do I report on my total maintenance costs? Well, costs are accumulated on the work order, not on the asset. So costs are accumulated on the specific work order, and then the work orders are linked to assets. So what we have done in the past is we have always, during implementation, written cost reports for you, as part of your implementation, and many customers have written those reports themselves. And in version 2.10, coming out again, the March release that's coming out, we have added a new collection of work order cost reports that you can essentially use, as templates, and then you can modify those work order cost reports. So in summary, so let's go back here to our learning objectives. What did we set out to cover here? How planned labor costs and actual labor costs are calculated, how planned and actual parts are calculated, and planned and actual miscellaneous, and then how the annualized PM costs are calculated on a PM by PM level, and of course then reporting on total work order costs. So that ends the formal component of our presentation. If you have questions, please enter your questions into the GoToWebinar panel, and then and we'll go through any particular questions that you might have. And also, as I indicated earlier, this webinar will be posted to the AssetOptics YouTube channel. Okay, so the first question here that I have is pertained to the planned part cost. So let me go here and the essence of the question is this. It is, if you update the planned quantity for a part, and new items have been received and the weighted average has changed, what's the unit cost that's used to calculate that, to calculate the new planned part cost? So let's go back here and let's go grab this work order and let's take a look at that. So let's look at the scenario that exists right here. We've got this particular work order part record. We got this work order part record right here. There's a planned quantity of 2. You'll notice that there's not a unit cost indicated on here, but rather there's a total planned part cost. Okay? If we went to this part, and let's say that we received in more of those parts and we changed the weighted average, or better yet, just to make it easy, I'm going to change the valuation method from weighted average to standard, to a standard cost. So now the unit value is linked to the standard cost. And then we're going to go back to that work. We're going to go back to that work order, and we're going to change the planned part costs. We're going to change the planned quantity to 1. Okay. Now, if we look at the planned part costs, The planned part cost is $21 because when you update the planned quantity at any point in time, if you update the planned quantity in plan or replan the planned quantity on that work order, it retrieves the part, the unit value at that specific point in time. However, when you issue, if you have had historical issues, the actual part costs do not change. The actual part costs reflect the cost of the part at the time that it was issued. So again, so let's just say that we're going to go issue the same part yet one more time to this work order. And I'm going to say we're going to issue one more of these. We're going to see that this issue is going to occur at $21, which is the current unit value for the particular part. And if we go back to the work order here, now we see that the total actual part cost is $82.50. If we go in and we look at all the individual issue transactions right here, we can see all of these costs that are rolled up right here. Okay, so we had two. Actually, we're just showing the unit value and aren't showing the extended value here on that. But all of it kind of rolls up, and of course, none of those past transactions changed. All right, well, very good. I see that we do not have any additional questions at this time. So we will end up. We'll wrap up. We will wrap up the webinar at this point in time. As I indicated earlier, a recording of this webinar will be placed onto the AssetOptics YouTube channel, and all the participants will receive a copy of the PowerPoint that we went through. If you have any questions, if you have any further questions, feel free to send an email directly to me, mike.edwards@assetoptics.com. You can also send an email to support@assetoptics.com, and that will run into our support queue, and you get an appropriate response. Thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful afternoon.